Hey church, welcome and thank you for worshiping with us. Wherever you're worshiping, in your home or on your TV, laptop or phone, you are a part of this family. And you could watch or listen to past messages by heading to mycornerstone.family. On our sermons page, you can view playlists, search for past messages, and more. You can even listen to our content by subscribing to the Cornerstone America's podcast, which can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. I hope you enjoy the message and thank you for being a part of the Cornerstone family. We're starting our Christmas series called The Gift. Today I want to talk to you about finding the King. This is kind of be our opening, getting us ready for the weeks that are coming ahead of us. So looking forward to this. So Christmas is a season that's, as you would all know, that is built on gifts, giving them, receiving them, sometimes returning them. And then sometimes we re-gift them, right? If we don't want them, we re-gift them. Anybody want to just confess that? We could open up the altars, we all come down and acknowledge that. But long before, we gave gifts, before the sales, before Amazon 2-day delivery, which, do we even get that anymore? I don't know that's a thing. There was gifts that were given not out of tradition, but out of revelation. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next several weeks. The title of the series, The Gift, talking about 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, that the wise men, or the magi, brought to Jesus. So this gets very interesting as I get ready to set the stage. These gifts were not given out of random. They weren't last minute. They were symbolic about what he was going to do. It represented his life, who he is, and what he came to do. And so we're going to set the stage this morning as we get ready to talk about this. We're going to talk about why the Magi traveled so far, and how did they recognize that Jesus was the King of the Jews, and why does this matter? Why did it matter to them, and why does it matter to us? So that's what we're going to be jumping into. And but we're here into the Christmas season, recognizing the greatest gift that was ever given is God giving His Son to die for us, so that we could come into relationship with Him. And so we're excited to begin celebrating that this morning. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 2 this morning. We're going to go down through the 12 verses there, just kind of talk about them one by one, setting us up for next week. So let's jump into it. I'm not going to read it and then go back and talk about it. We're just going to start reading through it. Many of you are probably familiar with the text. All right, Matthew chapter 2, starting in verse 1, the first part of this verse says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. Now, what we need to know, first of all, when we jump into chapter 2, is when we ended chapter 1, if you go back and read chapter 1, Jesus is born, almost 2 years has taken place between the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2. So Jesus is not a baby. We'll talk about why we believe that's true, that he is not a baby anymore. We believe that he's somewhere just under 2 years of age. Okay, and Bethlehem, this is interesting. He's born in Bethlehem. That means house of bread, and probably named after the fertile soil that was there, not after, Wonder Bread plant or factory that may be there now. I don't know about you. In Columbus, Ohio, we had this Wonder Bread factory, and anytime you drove through the center of town, you were always smelling the bread, and it did smell really good. So that's not what's happening in Bethlehem here, but the soil was good for agriculture use, and so is Bethlehem, house of bread. The interesting part of this, though, is, of course, it's prophetic, right? And we'll read a verse that talks about the Messiah would come from Bethlehem. And so it's prophetic that he would be born there, fulfilling Old Testament scripture. What's also interesting in Jesus, in one of his 7 I am statements found in the Gospel of John, he says, I am the bread of life, right? So you have interesting, the bread of life was born in the house of bread. So I kind of find that interesting and fun to think about. So it says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod. So what we need to understand about King Herod is he was not a true king of the Jews. He was like a paper king. He was set up to be king. He was underneath the Roman Caesar. Everybody hated him, and he was in great fear of being overthrown. So this man was just violent. He was cruel. He killed his wife. He killed his sons because he thought they would take over the throne. So anybody that was a threat to him, he would have them killed. And so we're going to have these wise men or magi come in and say, hey, we're looking for the King of the Jews, which is going to put up major red flags to King Herod, which is why later in this chapter, he wants to put all children, male children, to death under 2 years of age. So he was a puppet king, a phony king. The Jews hated him, and he was afraid of losing his throne and willing to kill anybody that he thought would take that from him.
All right, let's go into verse 1, part B, and verse 2. He says, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. So I like the translation Magi. Actually, this is a transliteration. Translations, a lot of times it's translated as wise men. There's a song about three kings that's been well known over the years. Some people have thought of them being kings. They're not kings. You could call them wise men as it's translated in some Bibles. In the newer NIV, it transliterates it, which they take the Greek word and just transliterate it right into English. So magi, or magos for a singular, and magi for plural. So that's really probably the best way to understand that, because wise men, who knows what a wise man is necessarily? And there is some doubt to how wise these men actually were. We'll get into that. So they're not kings. They were like wise men. They were magi. And I think the NIV, the newer NIV, does good. So the magi, these people, what we know of them, were a priestly caste from ancient Persia. So they were likely like prophet-type people, teachers. It was kind of this weird combination of philosopher, scientist, priest, astronomer, all kind of wrapped up into one person. And so that's kind of who they were. And as I said, probably not all that wise, because if you're going to go into King Herod's territory and say, hey, we're looking for the king of the Jews, which would be a threat to Herod, he's going to want to kill them and kill the Messiah and everything. So maybe not the smartest move, maybe moderately intelligent men. Maybe here we'll talk about that more as we get into it. Funny correlation, if you go to my next slide, there is a funny connection with Balaam. If you know the story of Balaam from the Old Testament, it's found in the book of Numbers. And Balaam is he's connected. He's like a magi. He's been connected with magi and more in Christian history than in the Bible. But there's an interesting connection. We know the story. Or you should go back and read it. It's funny because he's riding on a donkey. He's going to curse Israel, right? And then God puts an angel in front of the donkey. The donkey can see the angel, but Balaam can't. And so he's trying to steer his donkey, and his donkey's not going where he wants it to go, and it's making a fool out of him. He keeps beating the donkey, and finally God makes it so the donkey can talk, and the donkey says, you're really doing something stupid. Don't you realize this angel's here? And so then his eyes are open. He sees that there's an angel. And then when he goes to curse Israel, he can't curse them, and he gives them a blessing instead. So he's been called out onto the scene to curse Israel, and then he goes to curse them, and it doesn't work, and he ends up giving them a blessing. And this blessing, part of the blessing that he gives is a prophetic word that the Messiah would come. And notice that there's a star. And in the story that we're going to read in Matthew 2, we talk about how the Magi were following a star. And so maybe the Magi partly knew about the star from this story. And so it says here in Numbers 24, verse 17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. Talking about this one that will rise out of Israel. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. Talking about the Messiah. So this false prophet, this Magi in a sense, tries to curse Israel, ends up giving them a blessing, has this prophetic word come out of him about the Messiah coming, not near, not soon, but from afar, and a star will be a sign of it. And so he's kind of connected with the Magi. Now, of course, Balaam's not known for being all that smart either. You read the story, it's a funny story, not known for being that smart. And so we tend to think maybe the Magi were really not as smart and shouldn't call them maybe wise men. But we'll get more into that as we go. All right, so going back to Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, part B says the Magi from the east. We know they come from the east, probably Persia. If they traveled all the way from Persia to Bethlehem, that's about 1,500 miles. So they were probably trekking for 6, 8, 12 months maybe. If they were a little bit closer, maybe they had been hanging out in the Babylon area or that vicinity. Then they would have had about 900 miles to travel. So either way you slice it, that's a long way to go, a long way to travel. And verse 2, and notice when they arrived and asked, where is the one who has been born king of the Jews? So they asked Herod, who's the king of the Jews? Notice that we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. So they knew about the star. They knew about a king of the Jews that was to be born. And it would not have been uncommon for these Magi to know some Old Testament scriptures and prophetic words, even being from so far away. that, as you know, many of the Jews were in exile, had been scattered across the area, taken into captivity. After they had been released, some of them came back to the Holy Lands, to Jerusalem and Bethlehem and other areas like that. Some of them stayed in exile, living where they were. And so there would have been some synagogues in these areas and knowledge of Jewish scriptures and stories. They probably knew stories about the Messiah, some details of when he would come, and obviously they were up on that. And so this would not be uncommon for them to know about that. And so they're coming, asking the question, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? And they said, we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And so we have them following the star. Now this becomes interesting too. I think this was the original Star Trek, if you're familiar with the show. This is where it came from. Exploring strange new worlds and civilizations and boldly going where no man's gone before. Sorry, I'm dating myself with that. Does anybody remember Star Trek? I mean, yeah, some of us older people, like, I never got into the movies really, but it was it was more the TV series that we watched, right? Captain Kirk, James Kirk. Anyways, all right, let's keep going here. There's been 3 theories that have been thrown out about the star. The first one, it was a natural phenomenon that happened in the heavens. And so there's been talk about that. Some people like this view and kind of astronomical event that took place at the star that they followed. There's been some documentaries and stuff that have been done about that. The second one, obviously I think more likely here, supernatural phenomenon that God caused to happen. These Magi were following it. It had to lead them right to where the house was. I think we have an indication from the text that it led them right to the house, where Jesus was. So you got the supernatural phenomenon. And then third one is an angel. And some people go with this angel. They feel like the angel is a prominent figure in the birth stories of Jesus. And so it's not uncommon for angels to show up in dreams and warn Joseph and others about what to do. And so some think maybe it was an angel. Sometimes in the scriptures, angels are called stars. And so that's a terminology that could be used. But obviously I think the second one, just a supernatural phenomenon, would be the best indicator here. But notice what happened. They follow this star. And then verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So naturally, he would have been upset by this, because his kingdom is at risk here. He's at risk of being overthrown, being replaced, his power, his authority, his money. So he's disturbed. But then it says all of Jerusalem. And this becomes interesting. Was it all of Jerusalem? We know Jerusalem was a city, and maybe all of Jerusalem was disturbed or wondering about this. It also, when the reference is here to Jerusalem, it could be the religious leaders. It could be that Matthew is referring to the religious leaders of Jesus' day, that they were all disturbed, which seems very likely. And really Matthew setting up from the very beginning of his gospel that Jesus was going to encounter resistance, right? Which we know that he did, but maybe right here from the beginning, the religious leaders were disturbed by this because it would threaten their power and their authority too. It would threaten their status quo. So I imagine all the religious leaders were not excited about this idea and were disturbed by it. And what would that mean for them and their power and their authority? So they were all disturbed. Let's keep going. Verse 4. When he had called together all the people, talking about Herod, all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. So he calls in these religious leaders, and then he says, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, here's the prophetic word from the Old Testament, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So here's the prophetic word. They're pulling from it. They say he will be born in Bethlehem. So they know that. And so, but think about this. Jerusalem is about 6 miles away from Bethlehem. So they are in Jerusalem. This is the religious capital of the world for Jews. This is where you have the elite religious leaders for the Jewish community here. You've got these magi, these wise men that have traveled 900 miles, maybe 1,500 miles, 6, 8, 10, 12 months to get here. And having talked with the religious leaders, we have no indication that any of the religious leaders traveled 6 miles just to go see what was going on in Bethlehem. And I think maybe that gives us another indication where the leadership, where the religious leaders were in Jesus' day. Upon hearing this and these magi thinking that the Messiah has been born, they seem to have indifference and don't care to even travel 6 miles to find out, is this true? Do we know what's going on in Bethlehem? So we have this indifference, and in a sense, they all missed that first Christmas in a sense. So you can have Jesus right in the midst of you and still miss him. Right? We can go through this season with Jesus all around us, celebrating what he's done, and still miss him in our midst. And I think we need to be careful. It's a great time to, hey, let's set up this month, December, to be a great time of really focusing on Jesus and not missing him. With all the celebration going around us, we can be too busy and miss what he's wanting to really do in our lives. So just a great word for us. Again, contrasting the Magi, we're willing to travel a great distance to see him. Let's remember this. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 says, without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to him must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. God is a rewarder of those who seek him. When we seek him throughout the year, putting him first in our life, God rewards us for that. And he loves it when people come after him. I think he loved the fact that these magi were willing to kind of put their own agenda off to the side and travel so far just to come see baby Jesus. Are we willing to seek him? Are we going to continue to seek him? It's easy for us to get busy in the season, or get busy through life and not seek him. Are we still seeking him? Are we going to continue to seek him throughout this month and into the new year? And we should be thinking about now how we're going to do that. If we've slipped off our reading plan, it's time to get back on the reading plan. We need to get refocused, recenter our lives on Jesus. He is rewarder of those who diligently seek him. All right, let's go on. Matthew chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He's wanting to know, when did this happen? How old is this Messiah? He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. Now that's what he's saying to the Magi, but we know, if you've read the rest of the chapter, that he ends up killing all the children from 2 under because he wants to get rid of this so-called king. And so he's not really wanting to go worship him. He's wanting to get rid of him. So he has a plan to take his life. All right, verse 9. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star, now notice here, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So here we have the idea that maybe the star was not visible at some point. They ended up in Jerusalem, wanting to know where he's been born, not knowing. And as they trek out to Bethlehem, they see the star again, and it takes them right to the very house where Jesus is. This becomes very interesting because, first of all, we have the house. Let's talk first about the house. And this could have been the house that Jesus was born in, potentially. Jesus was not rejected from an inn. Older translations have that there was no room for him at the inn, gives us an idea that it's like a hotel type situation. But actually, the newer NIV says guest home. We believe that a lot of times they had a place for guests in their home, but because all the people were coming into town for the census, there was no room for them. So they had to stay maybe on a lower level where the animals were kept, maybe where the cooking was done. They were not able to get into the guest room. So we don't know. This could have been the house he was born in. Maybe it wasn't. They stayed for some length of time in this area. We don't know exactly how long, but they did stay there for a certain time. So we have the house, and then they saw the child. Now, part of the reason we believe that Jesus was not a baby at this time, because the word that Matthew uses here is child, which means like a toddler. So he's not still a baby. And I know we have these nativity scenes. We're going to blow this to pieces here, right? Because if your nativity scene looks like my nativity scene at our house, we've got baby Jesus, Mary and Joseph. We've got an angel there. We've got, shepherds there. And then we got the Magi, the wise men there. And the wise men really weren't there. They came later. Now, I still don't have a problem. And our nativity scene looks like a barn, too. It probably wasn't a barn either. It probably wasn't a wooden structure, But nonetheless, that's how we visualized it over the years, and it's caught on. And so the child was probably not a baby. He was probably somewhere under 2 years of age. And so they come to Jesus. Again, this becomes interesting. So if they wanted to be there for his birth, they're a little late. And this is where some of the ladies, I know you guys talked to me about this. If Jesus would have sent some women instead of some wise men, this whole thing would have looked different. They would have asked for directions earlier and gotten there on time. And they would have helped with the birthing and the cleanup afterwards. And they would have brought some gifts that made sense. You know what I mean? Like diapers, wipes, formula, things like that. And so that's why some people read this like, these were not wise men. These were maybe moderately intelligent men. But if there would have been women in the story, this thing would have happened a lot differently. And even some would tell like wise men, that's like an oxymoron. It's a contradictory terms like jumbo shrimp, rap music. Are you guys with me this morning? Okay, I'm going to stop with this. Let's just keep going. All right. Anyways, it could have been different. All right, verse 11. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. So they come from such a long distance and they bow down. They see the child and they bow down and they worship. They bow down and worship and they give him 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So here's becomes the interesting thing. Notice who they worshiped. They worshiped a child. When was the last time you bowed down and worshiped a child? Something was different about this child, that when they arrived, not only did they bring gifts, but they bowed down and they worshiped him. Notice also, too, what they did not worship. They didn't worship the star. They didn't worship Mary. They didn't worship Joseph. They were all there. They worshiped Jesus because he's the king. This becomes very interesting. They bowed down and they worshiped him. Now, here's the other thing about this story is how many wise men or magi were there? We tend to think there was 3 because they brought 3 gifts. We don't know that there were 3. It doesn't tell us. There could have been more. There could have been less. The Eastern church believes that there were like 12 magi that came. The Western church believes that there were 3. We tend to base it on 3 because 3 gifts were brought. We don't know how many magi there were. It could be that there was a significant group as they caravan together to bring them. But 3 gifts doesn't equal 3 magi, although it fits our storyline many times. Now, when it comes to the gifts, people speculate about what the gifts are for. One little preschooler said it like this: the maggots brought gifts. They brought gifts of gold, Frankenstein, and Smurfs. That is one way to look at it. But the significance of the gold, frankincense, and myrrh, I think, are clear. Gold is a gift for a king. If you're going to go visit a king, the best gift you could bring him gold. So I think, number one, they're recognizing that he is king of the Jews. They even said that. Where's the king of the Jews? Where has he been born? Where is he? And so it represents his kingship. And so they've traveled this long of a distance because he is the king. They've traveled far to honor him, the one that will rule over them. The second one being frankincense. Now, this is gift for a deity. Frankincense is rare, it's costly, it's sacred. It was used in the temple for worshiping God. And so this has to do with the fact that he's deity, that he is God, that he's worthy of being worshiped. Frankincense was used as worship. So he's no ordinary child. He's no ordinary king. He's worthy of worship. And so they bring him frankincense. So they bow down to him, not just as their leader, but as their Lord. And the third one being myrrh. This is maybe the most interesting gift. This is not one that you would typically bring to a baby shower. This is a burial spice. This is a spice they use for burying people. So again, speaking to his sacrifice, speaking about the way that he would die and the meaning to which he was going to die. So I think all 3 gifts representing who he is, what he had come to do, and these guys being pagans, Gentiles from a long distance, magi, come and have this glimpse into what he's going to do and who he is. When the rest of Jerusalem, and especially the religious leaders of Jesus' day, were indifferent, didn't care, or didn't want it because it would mess up their life. Now, I will say God has a tendency to mess up our lives sometimes, doesn't he? He rearranges priorities. We have our own set of priorities, and he comes in as like, let me give you a new set of priorities. So sometimes it does get a little messy, my will versus his will, being willing to surrender our will to his will, but it's always good to surrender to his will. And I think even they left change from this. Look at this last verse. We're going to get ready to close with this. Matthew chapter 2, verse 12. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So for sure, they went by another route. They went a different way home because they didn't want to tell Herod where he was so that Herod couldn't go find him and have him killed. But I think there's something else going on. They didn't just return by a different route. I think they returned home different. I think anytime you encounter Jesus, he changes our life. There's a first time encounter where he changes us, but there's an ongoing encounter. That's what Christmas is about, is that we've encountered him. There's been a first time encounter where we've surrendered our life. But there's ongoing encounters where he continues to change us and mold us and shape us. And I think these magi came one way, left another, but they also left changed. They left different. They came seeing, they worshiped, and they left believing. I think there was a change in their life. If you guys would stand up with me this morning as we get ready to close in prayer. As we move forward into the weeks, we're going to look at each one of these gold, frankincense, and myrrh and talk about them in more detail. But let's not miss the point that lives are changed because of Jesus. The last 2,000 years plus, lives are still being changed because of Jesus. And that's why we gather. That's why we come together. And God is still changing lives. He's still changing our lives. We're still growing. We haven't arrived yet. And God wants to do something in us this month and into the new year as we continue to surrender our life to him, to focus on what he's done for us, keep our eyes focused on him, the author and finisher of our faith.